You found something that excited you. Maybe it was a new hobby, a creative project, a person, or a goal that finally felt like it meant something. For a few days, maybe a few weeks, it consumed you. You thought about it constantly. You made plans. You told yourself this time would be different. And then, almost without warning, the feeling just disappeared. Not suddenly, not through disappointment or conflict. It's as if your former enthusiasm has slowly faded away. And now, you look at the thing that once made you feel alive and sadly wonder why you feel nothing. If this sounds familiar, keep listening, because what I'm about to share could change the way you understand yourself with awareness. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly starting over. It's not the exhaustion of working too hard or caring too much. It's the exhaustion of never quite arriving anywhere, of building something, abandoning it, and then watching yourself repeat the same pattern again and again, wondering if you're broken in some invisible way. You might tell yourself you're just someone who gets bored easily, that you have many interests, that you're simply being honest with yourself about what doesn't work. And maybe there's truth in that, but there's also something underneath it that rarely gets examined, something that has less to do with the things you're losing interest in and more to do with what's happening inside you. Let's look at 6 quiet psychological reasons why this pattern might keep showing up in your life. The first has to do with something called identity confusion, though not in the way you might think. When you don't have a stable sense of who you are, you unconsciously use interests, hobbies, and even relationships as a way to try on different identities. Each new thing becomes a question you're asking yourself. Is this who I am? Could this be my thing? And when the initial excitement fades and the thing no longer tells you something new about yourself, it stops serving its hidden purpose. So you move on. Not because the activity failed you, but because your sense of self was never anchored in the first place. You weren't pursuing interests. You were searching for yourself inside of them. The second reason runs deeper than most people realize, and it involves the way your brain processes reward. When you first start something new, your brain floods you with dopamine, the chemical that creates anticipation and excitement. But here's what most people miss. Dopamine isn't really about pleasure. It's about the promise of pleasure. It's about the gap between where you are and where you think you could be. Once you close that gap, once the newness wears off and the fantasy becomes reality, the dopamine drops. The thing itself hasn't changed, but your brain no longer sees it as a reward worth chasing. So you feel flat, even though nothing is actually wrong. And because we rarely understand this, we assume the problem is with the thing we chose, not the chemistry driving our experience of it. The third reason may be more challenging to accept. Sometimes, losing interest quickly may be a way to protect yourself from the discomfort that comes with truly trying. Because the truth about commitment is that when you stick with something long enough, you eventually reach a point where it becomes difficult. The moment when growth slows down, progress becomes invisible, and the gap between who you are and who you want to be becomes painfully apparent. Walking away before that moment arrives isn't laziness. It's self-protection. It's a way of avoiding the emotional exposure that comes with really caring about something. If you leave before it gets hard, you never have to confront what you're capable of, or what you're afraid you're not. The fourth reason is tied to the stories you've told yourself about who you are. If you've spent years identifying as someone who loses interest quickly, someone who's scattered, someone who can't stick with things, that identity becomes self-fulfilling. The moment something gets slightly less exciting, a quiet voice inside you says, "Here it is again. You're doing it again." And instead of fighting that voice, you surrender to it. Not because you want to, but because it feels familiar. This pattern is a kind of comfort, pushing you from the uncertainty brought by change into familiar territory. You get stuck not because you lack willpower, but because your brain confuses repetition with security. The fifth reason might sting a little. Sometimes, the intensity you feel at the beginning isn't passion at all. It's fantasy. It's a romanticized version of what the thing could become, how it could transform your life, what kind of person you'll be once you master it. And when reality sets in, when you realize that the hobby is just a hobby, that the project requires boring effort, that the person is human and flawed, the fantasy collapses. You mistake that collapse for losing interest, when really what you're losing is the illusion. This is why some people feel most alive during the first few weeks of anything, because that's when the dream is still intact. Staying requires something different. It requires you to love the thing for what it actually is, not what you imagined it could be. The sixth reason is one that rarely gets talked about, and it has to do with emotional burnout. Not the kind that comes from doing too much, but the kind that comes from feeling too much without understanding why. If you've spent your life absorbing emotions that weren't yours, managing other people's needs, or growing up in an environment where your inner world was ignored, you may have developed a habit of disconnecting from things before they become too overwhelming. Losing interest might actually be your nervous system's way of saying, "I'm at capacity. I can't hold this anymore." It's not that you're flaky, it's that you've been running on emotional fumes for so long that depth feels like danger. Here's what makes this pattern so confusing. It often disguises itself as something positive. Losing interest can feel like maturity, like you're being honest about what doesn't serve you anymore. It can feel like having high standards, like refusing to settle. It can feel like being multi-talented, like you're someone with too many gifts to be confined to just one thing. And sometimes, those things are true, but other times, they're stories we tell ourselves to avoid a harder truth. That truth is this: when you never stay long enough to experience the quiet rewards of depth, when you always leave at the first sign of fading excitement, you end up living on the surface of your own life. You accumulate beginnings but never reach the middle, where the real transformation happens. You build a life that looks full on the outside but feels strangely hollow on the inside. This isn't about forcing yourself to stay in things that genuinely don't fit. It's about learning to tell the difference between something that's truly wrong for you and something that just got hard or stopped being new. And that distinction, that ability to stay with discomfort long enough to see what's on the other side, that's what separates people who find meaning from people who keep searching for it in all the wrong places. If this video seems familiar to you, this behavior pattern does not mean you are wrong. It shows that you are human, and these situations are opportunities for you to discover yourself. This discovery is satisfaction itself. The next time you feel yourself losing interest in something, stop, observe yourself, become aware, ground yourself. If this video resonated with you, leave a comment and tell me what you noticed about yourself. If you want to embark on this journey of self-discovery with me, subscribe. There's so much more to discover, and we have a long way to go.